Charles, somebody's been stealing shit out of Africa.
It's really awful. I mean, now this year marks 50. Well, I actually went to Egypt in 1975, but 50 years since I first went to sub-Saharan Africa, and that was to Ghana on the West Coast. And in those, really before 1976, so I'd say around 1968, 70, that time frame, the U.S. began to ramp up its spending on so-called development aid. And I was never interested in working in that field, but I did spend about 2 years off and on going through East and West and North Africa. And I bet you if I went back to the places I visited 50 years ago, there would be in the cities change, but in the rural areas, not much sign of improvement. And that really is, it's, if you think about both of Jeffrey Epstein and Clinton, neither began life with a lot of money. And both have so far managed to scam billions of dollars. And in the case of the Clintons, it's off the backs of dark-skinned people in Asia, in Africa, in Central and South America. Most of these so-called development projects, charitable projects that Bill Clinton has scammed up, not scaled up, scammed up, many of them center on Africa. And as we've discussed in the past, the Western maps of the world, the Mercator projection, overstates the relative size of Europe and the United States and understates the gigantic size of Africa. So when you look at Africa on a globe, you do see just how big the total continent is. And then when you compare a country, for example, like Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is gigantic, to say Germany or France, and start looking at the electricity consumption, the miles of paved roads, the number of airports with paved runways, the degree to which water is safe to drink, the degree to which there's public sanitation services, the number of doctors and hospital beds per 1,000 people in the country. These countries are train wrecks now after all this aid money was scammed. So where did that damn money go? And could the fact that money was scammed out of Africa explain how a moron, a certified moron, Jeffrey Epstein, could be cast in the role of financial wizard to the adulation of the legacy press until now? On the one hand, you have missing aid money. On the other hand, you have bank accounts used to pay for who knows what kind of shenanigans involving powerful people around the world. There's a balancing there, but there hasn't yet been a tracing, an exact linking of stealing aid from Africa and other countries destined for truly vulnerable people to line the pockets of, you say what you want about Epstein, he was an evil fuck. To do what he did to all those underage girls and to who knows what else he was doing in his basements and ritual chambers on the various properties. So there's something badly wrong with the system that allows this to persist for decades. I mean, Epstein's malevolent adventures began in the 70s, virtually 50 years ago.
Charles,
so Q,
there you go.
What's going to happen in this coming week on the 20th? Yeah, Q, what's going to happen on the 26th and the 27th in Chappaqua, where evidently the members of the permanent, I guess it's oversight committee of the House and maybe staffers are going to sit down for depositions under oath, first of Bill and I think second of Hillary. Bill on his X profile, he claims that he founded the Clinton Foundation. He still claims that. Okay, in 990s, there's no 990 for the key year of 1997. That's key because on October 23rd, 1997, when the thing was incorporated, Bill and his team were in serious shit over the Paula Jones matter. They had a looming deposition of Bill Clinton. At the same time, it turns out, Ira Magaziner was upset to be blasted by a DC judge named Royce Lamberth for the way in which he and Hillary conducted the healthcare task force, where they claimed they conducted the hearings in secret, claiming that all members of the task force were government employees, when that was a bold-faced lie. There were hundreds of private contractors who stood to benefit, either directly or indirectly, from whatever reforms Hillary was going to foist on the public back then. So you have, and Bill, then early in January 1998, lies under oath. So all these two activities occurred prior to the IRS granting conditional tax exemption to the presidential charity on the 29th of January, 1998. Scroll forward to January of 2002. According to multiple reports, but especially including Joe Conasson's Man of the World, Maggie Williams, involved, I think, in the messes at the Clinton White House, supposedly of her own volition, picked up the phone to speak to Ira Magaziner early in January 2002. Now he was Eric Holder and another judge. Basically, there was an initial decision by Lamberth, which was really bad for Magaziner. It required fines, substantial fines being paid. That decision was referred to Eric Holder, who under Clinton was still in the infamous Department of, quote, Justice. And Holder, Magaziner's actions and those of the Healthcare Task Force were referred for criminal prosecution. Holder, of course, being the impartial, excuse my language, is a technical term, fuckhead, decides to not prosecute, and it finds another judge to just toss the Lamberth opinion. So scroll forward to January 2002. You've got a presidential foundation that has never explained what actually happened to the money that went to it in 1997, because it's never filed a 990 for 1997. It's filed every subsequent 990 in its then test period for whether it's a public charity, material containing epically material falsehoods about the identity and character of the donors in that early period, meaning that the crucial public support test to determine is it a public charity was knowingly calculated on a false basis, and was never, never rebuked by the IRS or punished by the IRS or DOJ. So in this test period, Bill Clinton likely uses Maggie Williams to get in touch with Magaziner, and they then embark on this excellent, malevolent project to, quote, fight AIDS, principally in Africa, but also in the Caribbean. Like most Magaziner projects, this project is flawed to the core. They begin it in the Caribbean in August of 2002, and there they pick a country, the Bahamas, that is not a lesser developed country. The only lesser developed country, or major lesser developed country in the Caribbean region, is Haiti. The others are, are small populations. Many of them are financial havens, so they have attracted assets and a tax base. They have a tourism industry, and the GDP per capita is way above lesser developed status. Also, these are small countries that don't have the infrastructure challenges present in Africa then and now. So on the strength of their experience, quote, in the Caribbean, they cobbled together a flight to Africa in 2002, in September of 2002, with Epstein and, of course, movie actors, because they're instant health and models and masseuses and stuff like that. Never bothering to amend the Articles of Incorporation or run the idea past the IRS of altering the mission of the Presidential Foundation. That would have been a much easier thing to do. I mean, they could have just said, listen, it's a natural thing. While I was president, I thought Hillary had not decided to run for Senate in New York. We got her the Kobe Bryant Senate seat. because Hillary at that time didn't know what I was doing specifically with Lewinsky. And by the time she found out, I had to give her something. And so we decided to move to New York. So it would have been perfectly logical on the way out the door when he still had his nominee in at the IRS to say, we want to change the mission of this foundation to be grander than just simply a library in Little Rock. And then either learn from the IRS what you had to do that properly, to amend the Articles of Incorporation and seek the approval of the IRS when your own boys and girls controlled it, or create a new foundation, as Carter did. And Carter had a library foundation and a separate foundation. So they, of course, didn't do that. And instead, Bill allowed his daughter eventually, Chelsea, to work at McKinsey and work on a project examining how the Global Fund came together. And the Global Fund came together in January of 2002, I think January 22nd, from memory serves, 2002 or thereabouts. Now, the Global Fund was a gigantic slush fund where big nations in the world were guilt-tripped into believing that by funneling money to Switzerland, this Global Fund, part of the World Health Organization, and basically maybe outside the jurisdiction of national law, would turn and find ways to direct these sums to fight AIDS, right? This doesn't say the Global Fund to fight HIV. It says the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. Well, all that this operation has done is to work with entities like the supposed Clinton Foundation and others that claim they can distribute drugs and improve the healthcare infrastructure in these poor places. Many of them are in Africa. Well, what are the credentials of Bill Clinton and Ira Magaziner to fight AIDS? In Bill's case, he fights AIDS, by using a condom as a guess. I mean, he has no medical training. And indeed, when he was president, the Clinton administration did nothing significant to fight, quote, AIDS.
Charles,
what's that?
Is this $3 billion they have in this?
Is that the Global Fund?
Yeah, $3.2 billion.
Well, which Global Fund is that? The Global Fund I'm talking about is in Switzerland.
This says Switzerland, outside the U.S., tax-exempt EIN number, Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. And then, unless I'm crazy, this says $3.2 billion, and they're spending 3.133.
Yeah. And so going back then
they
to 2002,
lost $3 billion. The expenses are $6 billion.
Right. It's a gigantic operation. Go back to 2002. In 2002, the argument was that branded HIV drugs, that would extend your lifespan by delaying the day of reckoning when HIV, in theory, turns into AIDS, full-blown AIDS, which is a death sentence. Those branded HIV antiretroviral drugs, they're called, were still very expensive in 2002. Some argue that it was $10,000 per patient per year. And the fable that Magaziner has created with Bill is that it was Bill and Magaziner and the Clinton Foundation that brought down the price of generic HIV/AIDS drugs. That challenge by a company called CIPLA, CIPLA, an Indian company, I believe the CEO, the charismatic, I don't know if he's still alive, CEO of CIPLA, had been arguing since about 1997, i.e. when Bill was still president, that his generic versions of these branded drugs could be sold in the market for, say, $500 per patient per year instead of $10,000 per patient per year. And so the surface-minded, low IQ Wellesley and other graduates, Georgetown graduates, looked at this math and said, well, it's simple, let's just give them generic drugs. Without comparing and contrasting the the delivery systems. I mean, it's not, you don't just give somebody a pill and fight AIDS. I mean, as is the case with other illnesses, people who get sick can have comorbidities, other issues. And going into these countries in Africa, claiming that you're spending money because you added 100 hospital beds or maybe a generator in this rural hospital, that just vastly understates the true problem, health problems across the continent. And so it was a surface level argument that people like Elton John and the entertainment community all saw, this is great, we're fighting AIDS, just like we were fighting climate change decades later, without understanding what the hell we were talking about. This scam, and it truly was a scam, and is a scam, resulted very quickly in Bill and Magaziner promoting the activities of a company called Ranbaxy, Ranbaxy. Indeed, I think in the 2003 annual report, there's verbiage in the Ranbaxy annual report, if you could still find it, about the business development arrangement that Ranbaxy entered into with the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation. Presidential foundations are not supposed to engage in for-profit development, business development, favoring the fortunes of one generic drug company over another. But Bill and Magaziner did just that. They promoted these generics for Ranbaxy and for others. They promoted certain medical test vehicles to determine whether you had HIV. And there was another diabolical problem in it, that the testing, when you test for something, like anything, really anything, you can set the parameters of the test to be very, very detailed and focus in on, do you have just HIV? Or if you widen the scale, the test will come back positive for things that may or may not be HIV. For example, when a woman is pregnant, healthfully pregnant, on these widely calibrated tests, she would show up as HIV positive. And people have extensively reported about it. There's a woman called Celia Farber who began focusing on this before 2006, but wrote a seminal work as it were, in Harper's on this, and was viciously attacked by the pharmaceutical industry for her work. So basically what Magaziner and Clinton did is they first, to the many countries that use their so-called procurement consortium, more on that in a second, they would go to a local country, let's say in Africa, and say, listen, do you have an AIDS problem? And some would come back and say, of course not. And then somebody would say, well, wait a minute, of course you do, because if you do, with a little bit of work, my consultant over here, Magaziner, can whip up a business plan that projects the long-term needs of HIV resources to fight HIV in your country over a 5-year period. And with that 5-year plan, we can go to Switzerland and convince the bureaucrats in Switzerland to give us more money than we really need to fight the problem. And we'll then go about and pretend that we're fighting the problem, and nobody's really going to account for any of this. And what ended up happening, by one reckoning, an insider in the Global Fund was tasked with figuring out how much waste and corruption and fraud had occurred around the 2016 timeframe or thereabouts. And that person concluded that 75% of the money sent to Geneva was stolen. 75%. And we're talking here about 100 billion sent and 75 billion stolen.
It almost seems like 200% of the money is stolen, Charles, because they said they had $3 billion and they spent $6 billion. So they're just stealing twice as much.
Well, they had cash in the bank in that case. But no, the amount of money that went to the Global Fund is well over 100 billion. So this whole exercise, we've been talking about it for a number of weeks now, of the Clintons actually testifying under oath. If testimony is sought about relations between the Clintons and Epstein prior to, from at any time, but in particular from 2001-2 forward, prior to the issuance of the first attempted audit on June 9th, 2006, the Clintons will be entering a minefield of unparalleled danger for themselves if that testimony gets publicly released. Because they're either going to have to say they didn't work with Jeffrey Epstein in any way or plead the fifth. But the second they go down the trail saying, yes, actually, Epstein was a philanthropist and he came to us and this is what he did. And I flew with Epstein to Africa in September 2002 on his jet. And on this trip, I signed a memorandum of understanding. It's like, back the fuck up. How did you do any of this? You're not in the 990s. You're not an employee. You're not a trustee. You're not a key employee, an officer or a trustee or director. Show me the authority that the Presidential Foundation had to do international work. There is no such authority. And then as you go through the years, after April 25th, 2005, there was no foundation. There were no bylaws for the William J. Clinton Foundation, which supposedly merged with the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative on the 31st of December 2005. There were no bylaws. There was no secretary. There's no way to carry out the requirements under Arkansas and federal law to affect these mergers or any subsequent corporate action.
So, Charles, let me pause you there for a second. Because we are just a few minutes away from going over to the First Amendment Forum, where we need to discuss all of these details and more. People are going to be able to join us there on crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com and on subscribestar.com and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. But, we're talking today about stealing stuff out of Africa and with Epstein, because everybody is very focused on Epstein. And I wanted to ask you about something. There's been a lot of, I've seen this guy, Michael, Tracy, getting a lot of traction. He's fancies himself some expert in Epstein, but he's taking the sort of contrarian argument that this is a moral panic about the Epstein case and that there's insufficient evidence for all these kind of crimes. He focuses on, obviously, there are more credible allegations than others in there. And this guy, as I've observed, likes to focus on the ones that are the most difficult to prove. So he's trying to make the case that this is a moral panic. But for years, you have been talking, and I'm not trying to minimize the severity of any crimes. I'm just saying, let's set aside for a moment the allegations of crimes against children and sex crimes and whether he's a spy for Israel or the CIA or the King of Siam, and just focus on the public admissions that there's not even a question of was this done or not. Things that you're talking about, where we have this letter from Gerald Lefcourt saying that Jeffrey Epstein was pivotal in forming the Clinton Foundation. And now there's a New York Times article talking about Ghislaine Maxwell playing a role in that. And just like they went after Al Capone, not for murder or racketeering or prostitution or illegal importation of alcohol, it was tax evasion. There are basically unequivocal facts in the public domain of crimes committed by the Clintons, the Epstein gang, that people should be going after, that we just in the last minute here, take us around to that, and we can talk about that some more in the First Amendment Forum.
Sure. The Trump family has twice been disciplined for operating different foundations from a base in New York State without filing the truthful disclosures or a reckoning for what happened to the money. The Clinton Foundation, in contrast, the affairs of the Clinton Foundation have been directed from offices, some undisclosed, inside New York State, beginning by 2001, if not earlier. And the first reports that I've seen inside New York State occur around 2006. So in the very important period where Jeffrey Epstein from New York, Bill and Hillary Clinton from New York, were getting involved directly and indirectly together, quote, on international projects, there's no paperwork in New York State. Now, why is that important? New York State has high tax rates and cares a lot about, in theory, whether charities are fleecing the Treasury by failing to disclose properly all of their inflows, all of their outflows, and any related party payments that should maybe not have been made. So what can happen is that charities like the Clinton Foundation, Epstein also operated charities, can be used to pay for personal expenses with tax-exempt funds, and or to park money that should have been declared as income in a leaky tax-exempt operation. So there's no reporting on the Clinton Foundation that's required. There are no audits in this period. New York State is careful. Arkansas actually required an audit beginning in April of 1999, but didn't define what an audit was. New York went much further in the statutes and regulations to make plain that an audit must be a document that is fully compliant with accounting standards prevalent in the U.S. Clinton's never did an audit for New York, never did an audit for California in this time frame. Took a lot of money from New York and California foundations. Those foundations disclosed the grants as being grants to a public charity, which it certainly was not in this time frame. One of the prime directors, Terry McAuliffe, was served in this period as I think head of the DN's Democratic National Committee in a job of raising money and bragging about all the money he raised to fund Democratic campaigns and initiatives. So he's doing this simultaneously while he's the only director
we're just about
on the board.
Time here, Charles. I don't know if you missed the part where I said in the last minute, bring us up to speed on this, but we've got to go over to the First Amendment Forum. Can you hear me?
No problem.
Can you hear me? Anyway, we'll be back in a minute, everybody. Stay with us.
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit, Jason. So that's why
I can tell that you had a bit of a weak connection there. Charles is on his international tour de force, but we'll be back in a minute. Stay with us, everybody. We've got a lot more to talk about.